Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Apologies for the slight delay. We were waiting for numbers to come in, but it's nice to see that we've got some people in this morning. So thank you very much for attending today's session. Hopefully you can all see my screen welcome to Operational versus Strategic Procurement. This is part of the procurement work that we're doing currently in the Supply Chain School. To look at how we upskill individuals in the industry around basic procurement knowledge. So today what we're going to do for the next sort of 40 minutes is take a little bit of a dive into what the difference is between sort of operational and strategic procurement and the patterns, if you like, of how organisations are developing over time in the way they approach procurement. So in terms of the session, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Helen Carter. I work for Action Sustainability, who run the Supply Chain School, and also provide support and training and guidance in a variety of areas, she says this morning, not enough coffee, around procurement, sustainable procurement, and more recently, modern slavery and human rights within the supply chain. So what are we going to cover while you're sitting there having your breakfast rather than your lunch, probably? We're going to go through some of the basics around procurement, and what we have done is develop this as a high level, or sorry, an introduction, if you like, into the subject matter. So it is assuming that you have a little bit of knowledge around procurement, but you don't have to have a huge knowledge. What we'll do is we'll start with a quick introduction into what this programme is trying to achieve. So if you're not familiar with what we call the P2P project, I'll give you a quick introduction. We'll make sure that we all understand what we mean by the terminology of procurement. So a quick introduction to procurement, why it's important. Look at operational versus strategic procurement. So is there a difference? What are organisations currently doing? And then take a slightly deeper dive into operational versus strategic. So what you need to have a look at in those areas, things to go away and consider. And then we don't just do one-offs, so I'll let you know future events, and then open to Q&As. We are recording this, so you will be able to see a video of it later on if you want, and we'll share that link with you. We'll also share the slides, so you will get a copy of these slides. And if you want to use the Q&A box or the chat box to put any questions in, I'll have a look at those at the end and capture those as we go through. So what's this program that we're looking at? What's the P2P program? So we've been running this project now for probably about a year and a half, and the idea is that we were looking to understand how we can help and improve knowledge around general procurement. We do a lot of work on sustainable procurement, as you know, and some of you may have been to mine or Mel's sustainable procurement training, but this is really starting to look at the procurement aspects alone. This is a project that we are running with CITB, or it's been funded by CITB, along with some of the partners in the school. And we've been working alongside organisations like King's College, the Institute of Collaborative Working, and SIPS. And everything you will attend, whether it's e-learning modules, whether it's workshops, has the CPD accreditation associated with it as well. So if any of you are in SIPS, for example, you can use this for your CPD hours. The programme itself has got two elements to it. So this bit is part of the first element, which is us providing you lots of resources, looking at e-learning that we've created. So we've got a suite of 8 e-learning modules that you can access through the school, ranging from introduction to procurement all the way up into sort of real leading edge thinking around collaborative frameworks and collaborative behaviours and models that we're going through. And within that, you can also assess your own competencies through things like our competency tool, where if you're looking to upskill your own procurement teams, we have the resources. You don't know where to start, use the competency tool that's on there so that individuals can understand what they currently know about procurement and obviously what they do then need to know, how they need to evolve that over time. We're also working with 11 partner organisations. We're currently sort of going through a selection process for those at the moment on what we've abbreviated to SKIPs, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but we call them Supply Chain Improvement Projects. And these are trying to take the theory that we are teaching everybody, the sort of upskilling, if you like, and apply it in a practical manner to show that actually we can improve productivity, we can improve successful outcomes if we procure properly. And we have got a tool, a performance tool that we'll be using to capture data to be able to evidence that. As a lot of the challenges that we have in our industry do come down to how we procure, do come down to how we manage our supply chain. So very quick introduction to the programme. We will have events on over the next sort of 6 to 12 months. We'll keep giving you an insight into what that programme is, but feel free, we'll send a link to the webpage to go and have a look if you want to know more about that specific aspect. So before we get into the sort of operational versus sort of strategic purchasing, procurement, sorry, what I wanted to do was just give you an overview of how we're considering procurement, what the definition of procurement is. And living in procurement world for 30 odd years in my life, one of the big challenges I find in any organisation is that lack of knowledge and understanding around what procurement actually is, as opposed to maybe the more historical perception of what procurement does in most organisations. So if we start with an introduction to procurement, the best way to think about it is to pick out definition. Now, CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, are the sort of vocational qualification, although I do appreciate that if you live in the commercial world, you may have the RICS of the world that also touch on procurement, ICE, getting involved in things like JCT and NEC as well. So there is a huge sort of range of stakeholders, if you like, that pick into this. But fundamentally, when we're talking procurement, we're talking about how we get the goods and services and works from any sort of third-party organisation. And the important thing to understand here is that when we talk procurement, what we're talking about is the whole life cycle. So we're talking about the moment you know you need something through to disposal and end of life, and the procurement process being that aspect of acquiring those goods and services going forward. The reason that's important is because when you start to think about who's involved in all those processes, actually it's not just your traditional purchasing teams or your traditional procurement teams. You know, the people who specify the needs, the people who contract manage, are usually outside that procurement team environment. So procurement is a bigger function than just historically what we used to call buying stuff. People would call individuals buyers or purchasers. Procurement is that whole life, and that's important to understand, particularly in construction, because what we're really getting into is the essence of things like supply chain management. And right now, if we have procurement people on the call, I should imagine that you're incredibly busy trying to work out how you can keep projects going by getting your stuff, by getting, you know, the people and the materials and the plant that everyone is really swimming around to try and find it. So when we talk about procurement function in any organisation, whether it's small or whether it's large, it is about that whole life that we are thinking. And just to be able to emphasise that, CIPS used to be called the Chartered Institute of Purchasing and Supply. They've recognised this now and are called the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. So you'll hear terminology all over the place, but procurement is from the moment to disposal that we need to be aware of. In terms of the procurement process, and we'll get into the nuances of strategic versus operational in a moment, but there are, whether you're looking at operational or whether you're looking at strategic purchasing, you've still got 3 key aspects that you need to be considering. So within the aspect of what you're looking for, apologies, my sound isn't working very well. Just try and see that. Let me know if there's any more problems with the sound, apologies. Is that you start with your planning. What is it that you need? Identifying the business need, and depending on whether we're getting into small operational procurement, understanding the suppliers that are out there, or big strategic purchasing and understanding what the market is doing, that's part of that planning phase. The sourcing is probably the traditional purchasing route that we think of, so the pre-qualification tenders, thinking about the contracts, evaluating those tenders going forward. And then the bit that hopefully we're not doing, which is called the let and forget, as I tend to call it, is managing a lot of the procurement contracts that you put in place to ensure the successful outcome. Each of those activities does happen whether you're buying at an operational level or whether you're trying to be more strategic. But obviously the sort of activity contained within each of those is obviously very varied, and we'll go into those as we go through. But the procurement process itself has to start with that planning phase through then to the management and then the learn phase that we go from there. I'm going to show you a little video now that talks a little bit about why procurement is really important. And we're starting, as I said, we're starting to see some of that today in the way that things operate. But this is a really good understanding of why procurement is becoming such an important function.
So why is procurement important? Well, there's a number of reasons, including how good procurement can help businesses to manage risk more effectively and build resilience. It can help businesses to identify and engage with their subcontractors at a much earlier stage in the procurement process, and it can have a huge impact on the organisation's sustainability performance. In terms of risk, there's a variety of things that potentially can and sometimes do go wrong. And so being proactive in the way that we identify and assess risk at an early stage of the procurement means that we can be much better prepared if something happens. Identifying and engaging subcontractors early in the procurement process can really help to deliver stronger, closer and longer lasting relationships because all the parties involved are invested in the project. This can help to improve efficiency and could lead to the joint development of more creative or innovative solutions, resulting in cost savings, quality improvements, or both. And then in terms of sustainability, there are just so many benefits that we could talk about. For example, we could highlight how investing in more efficient buildings, vehicles and machinery can reduce your environmental impact and deliver financial savings. Or we could think about how being green can help you to win more business and protect against reputational damage. To paraphrase a friend and colleague of mine at the school, sustainability won't cost you more, but bad procurement will.
So one of the strong drivers of why this program's been put in place is to really make sure that good procurement activity is being embedded in organisations, but we're also trying to understand and realise the importance and benefits associated with good procurement. As Carl said in there, sustainability is one of those issues, but there's actually a bigger picture that we need to be thinking about. We have been dealing with issues around procurement for decades. In construction, we always have. We just have not always necessarily associated them with procurement. But successful deliveries on projects do really rely on good procurement strategies, good procurement approaches, and better and cohesive approaches with our supply chain. Because we have risks, and a lot of the risks that we have in construction these days are linked to influences on plan and time and development and budget. Influences on logistics, challenges around the sustainability area, in my specific area around modern slavery, for example, and labour standards, looking at things like the inability to get resources. And if you're working in an infrastructure at the moment, there's a huge number of infrastructure projects that are competing for resources to keep their projects running. So we have inherent risks because we rely significantly on a supply chain to allow us to deliver every day the outcomes in the projects that we're looking for. So procurement is so fundamental to ensuring that those risks are understood, are managed effectively, and then obviously working with our projects rectified to enable us to deliver. We've also got efficiencies, better ways of doing things. The significant reliance that we have on supply chain in most organisations is because, especially when you get to the tier ones and the principal contractors, they're managing organisations. They are not specialists in anything other than managing a project. They would bring in specialists, you would bring in specialists that would actually understand how to do the piling, how to do the dry walling, how to provide the right men and the right women on our site to provide the right services. That's why we have the supply chains. So good procurement allows us to really dive into those expertise and obviously look at ways we can improve our productivity, make sure we understand whose role it is to do certain jobs, bring that connectivity between the various different aspects of the supply chain to ensure that our projects are working efficiently and effectively. And in certain instances, reducing lead times, looking at more efficient ways of doing things to help our projects run more swiftly. That links in quite nicely then to efficiencies. And again, efficiencies aren't always about trying to tell a supplier that you need a lower cost. And in fact, we run a number of workshops on sort of cost and value on materials, cost and value on plant. It isn't always about reducing that price. It's understanding how we can operate more efficiently, how we can do more with less, making sure that we're managing suppliers, really harnessing their expertise, but bringing it together to make sure our projects run, and identifying those opportunities where we possibly can. And then probably two buzzwords in our industry at the moment, innovation's one, collaboration's the other, but it's part of the same pot. We are in a really unprecedented time in construction. We've been talking about change for decades. I've only been working in construction about 25 years, so I'm a bit of a baby in comparison to some. But we've been talking about change ever since I entered the industry. But there is a real feel now that change is starting to happen because we have to. So we need to understand that we have to be evolving, whether it is looking at how we're addressing the skills shortage, whether it's looking at how we can start to think about doing more with less, new products that help with the carbon agenda. These are hot topics that are constantly now at the forefront of a lot of our procurement decisions. So innovation, understanding what the market can do. We need a procurement function in most organisations really to have that horizon scanning, that view on what the market is, so that when we do start to go to the supply chain to talk about we need this innovation, we need these new products, we need to think about how we can address these issues, it isn't immediately hit with price increases or higher costs, that we can start to work more collaboratively and understand how we can create the paved way, if you like, to get us to the position of those new products, the new skills, in a more efficient and effective way. Looking at that value for money. Value is again another hot topic that we talk about a lot in the workshops, but now looking at how we look at social value, added value in everything that we're purchasing. It is no longer just about cheapest price, although I will put my hand up because a lot of you will be sitting there at your keyboards now saying it's still down to cheapest price. In some instances it is, but we are seeing that change now move to, and you've got to show me value. So understanding the market and working with the supply chain is quite key to that. So procurement as a function has got a huge role to play. But in my days, in the early times when I used to work at Trillion, a very long time ago, so that shows you how long it was, there was a very strong focus when you went down at project level to still looking at operational procurement. And if you talk to the likes of the Morgan Sindals, the Wilmot Dixons, the Balfour Beatties, you talk to most of the big tier ones and mention the word category management, people will spit at you probably because it's been talked about for so many years, tried to be embedded successfully and unsuccessfully over the last sort of 10, 15, 20 years. There is a recognition now that we need to understand how to do strategic procurement, but we will always have a desire and a need, particularly at project level, to start thinking about operational procurement, making that more efficient. There are nuances between the two, and it's important to make sure we understand those nuances. So let's go into what they are now before we actually start to pick up some of those specific aspects. When we're talking about procurement, you can be talking about upstream and downstream procurement. So upstream procurement is really where we're starting to think about that strategic approach, setting our strategy, thinking about whether we could be looking at category management, whether we should be looking at working with suppliers more closely, partnering, or up, all those sorts of considerations we'll go into in a bit more detail. But by doing all of that at the front end, it allows us to be more efficient in what I call our downstream procurement, which is where we get into that operational spend. And the operational spend is the things that we think about on a regular basis. I'm on my site and I need my materials, I need my plant, I need to go and hire some guys and girls to enable me to fulfill my project. That sort of operational procurement needs to happen on a daily basis. It will never go away, but there are ways that we can tie operational and strategic procurement together better to ensure that we are more efficient and effective. And there are challenges associated with that, obviously. A lot of this does rely on relationships and data, so it's important to make sure that we do understand that when we create this strategic approach to procurement and start to think about operational benefits associated with that, data is key, capturing information, understanding what's going in the marketplace, but also thinking about how we deal with suppliers and managing them effectively is also important. So one of the best structures I've ever seen in procurement was a particular tier one that I audited actually for a sustainable procurement activity, where they'd actually got a sort of triangle approach to procurement, where they'd got purchasing, they've got supply chain management, and they've got supplier development, all key aspects of strategic procurement, but separate departments that work together to really pick up those nuances of what was going on in the supply chain. They all reported to one director. So it meant that they were working more collaboratively within those spaces. So when we think about procurement, when we're thinking about strategic and operational, there are differences, but they are actually connected. The challenge is that what I've seen happen quite a lot when you get into procurement is individuals saying, well, you know what, we're going to go to a strategic model. We're going to start to think about category management. We're going to start to think about supplier relationship management. I'm going to take my buyers and I'm going to ask them to do that. And the reality is that if you actually look at how I buy operationally on a site, or even through my businesses, if I'm a small, medium-sized business, the skill set necessary to do that is a completely different skill set necessary to be strategic. There's a huge need and growth in behavioural change and in culture and in the softer skills associated with strategic management, as opposed to what we think of traditionally around purchasing, which is that hard-nosed negotiation, analytical, very focused. So it is important that we understand the sort of differences between those two aspects, mainly because you do need a different type of person to do each one. And when you're thinking about career development, when you're thinking about improving your staff to go from an operational role up to maybe a strategic role, there is a need to think about how you build their competency. And in the main, it's usually the softer skills that they need to learn more on. In traditional purchasing, it is usually lower cost. It's usually that more analytical price per unit that you're looking for. You're bringing in high volume. You're thinking about maybe just focusing on a local supply base. You're looking at maybe thinking about, I have no more materials at the moment. Who am I going to go to? Who's got some? And that's probably what's happening at the moment on some of your projects, where you might be at that operational level thinking, where do I get my materials from? Where do I get my plant from? And that's fine right now in terms of I have an immediate need. Operationally, I need to just fulfill that. But actually, slowly and surely, as we know that this current crisis is going to go into 2022 and possibly longer, we need to start thinking about moving into that more strategic approach, where we start to think about how we get closer to suppliers, how we get more of a relationship with some of our suppliers going forward, how we can actually start to think about sharing information on our needs and our volumes, and then allowing suppliers to think about in innovative ways to be able to now allow you to meet your needs and allow them to meet other customer needs as well. So what we start to see in that strategic sourcing is this bit about, it's the value. It's not just price, it's the total cost. It's areas where we need to start to think about price plus cost plus value associated with that. Usually the relationships that we have with suppliers in a strategic world are softer. You might even have multiple relationships at multiple levels, but it is much more about that sort of supplier relationship management, understanding the capability of the suppliers, understanding the marketplace in which they're operating in. So the two have got very different approaches and skill sets associated with them. If I was to go into operational procurement in itself, what you would start to look at is a very transactional approach, tactical approach, if you like. Slowly and surely, I have a need. I need to understand what my demand looks like. It could be requisition, it could be something that comes through the project in terms of bill of quants. But fundamentally, what is my demand? What do I need to be able to do that? Selecting suppliers can be as complex as picking up the yellow pages, I say. Or alternatively, this is where you can start to get links into strategic management, where you might be putting frameworks in place, catalogs of materials in place, so that selecting suppliers is almost done for the operational teams, to allow them to then just go off and pull from a bill of quantities from other suppliers that you've got agreements in place with already. So there's two different ways of doing it, depending on how you even want to manage that operational level procurement. You then obviously, once you've selected your suppliers, get into ordering the product, and there's huge efficiencies even at operational level that you can bring in, sort of make sure that operational procurement is efficient, and we'll go into some of those in a moment. But monitoring those orders, bringing it in, making sure you've got the right materials coming in, the right man hours coming in, the right type of plant coming in, just so that you can do your invoicing and payment is really the whole sphere of what operational procurement is. There will still be some sort of supplier management and contract management, but it will tend to be more focused at operational level to enable your project to run on a regular basis, to make it sure that all the outcomes are looking for as well. So it's very much in that sort of circle with individual bits contained within it. There are approaches that you can think of within operational. So, you know, you're starting to think about, well, I've got issues at the moment around materials, so I could be looking at doing some forward buying. Being very careful around your materials is important to make sure you don't end up over committing. I've seen that happen so many times on projects where, you know, there's been a worry about the marketplace, you've committed to lots of materials and ended up with huge amounts of obsolete stock. So forward buying is a good idea if you've got a concern, but still try and do that in a way that makes sense. Working with your specifiers, working with the people who are building designs, for example, to make sure you're buying the right product, the right steel grade or the right material grade or timber grade, whatever it is you're looking for. It tends to be traditional tendering. Sometimes it could be as simple as picking up a phone, here's my tender, give me a price. 3 quotes if you're in public sector tends to be the way that goes. But it is very much one-off transactions. Here it is, thank you very much, that's what I'm going to buy. You might look at spot buying again if you've got some concerns around the marketplace. So one-off purchases in areas where you see a price that's really effective. So as you can see in the operational stage, it doesn't tend to be very much orientated around that value proposition. It's I have a need, I have a price, I have to be able to flex, and I have to bring it in. And that has a place definitely within procurement, but where you have certain things for increased value, you need to think about the strategic approach, which we'll go into in a moment. And you can think about just blanket orders that you can do call-offs from over time. So there's lots of different things in terms of procurement structures that you can bring in that will allow you to do that sort of reactive purchasing or slightly organised and planned purchasing on a project level. If you're into thinking about how to make it efficient, you can look at tools. So I do know that even if you do put in sort of catalogues of products and materials for certain suppliers at a strategic level, you can agree things like corporate purchase cards to actually ensure that the transactional value is quite low or the cost of the transaction is low. And actually you can then bring efficiencies into the way that you procure by working with the supplier on how those transactions are allocated. There's lots of work you can do in the background to really run that operation going effectively. Things like e-tendering I've seen used to reduce the tender process down, so efficiencies in those areas. And then, as I said, using frameworks and catalogues where things have been agreed up front already, and that's tied into that more strategic approach. But at an operational level, you know then that your buyers and your teams can literally just pick from their menu and get the things that they need and tie it into that bigger procurement approach that we'll talk about in a moment. So in terms of how we manage this operationally, there is always a need. It always has to happen, but there are definite ways that we need to think about how we can start to link some of these operational considerations into that bigger strategic piece. One of the problems with operational one-off buying, the sorts of issues that you have around operational procurement, tend to be that you don't do a huge lens at operational level. You won't have that lens other than I need it to be here on time, right price, right place. The traditional methods, I suppose, that you talk about in your purchasing days. But we have risk management. Without that forward planning, without thinking about what's going on, and especially now with materials and labour and plant being an issue, we have risks to projects. So we need to make sure that we start to think about how we manage this risk effectively. With my modern slavery hat on, and with my human ethics side of things, you know, if we just go out and find somebody who can provide us with some guys and girls to do the jobs that we want on our sites without understanding any of the risks associated with exploitation, it provides us with a risk on site too. So operational purchasing doesn't allow you to manage your risks very effectively. Also, the issues around CSR and sustainability, whether it is I'm looking for a more low carbon product, whether I'm looking for products that I can say are responsibly sourced, whether I'm looking for plant that has the right emissions associated with it, or the right health and safety statistics associated, we start to find that that's a little bit difficult to do if you're literally at that really sort of simple operational level. I'm just going to pick up the phone and ask somebody for a yellow digger or a piece of kit or a certain skill that I'm looking for. So operational procurement doesn't always have that lens, and a lot of it is also because an operational buyer won't necessarily know what to look for in those situations. It doesn't help with supply chain resilience. Your supply chain will react and give you what it can, but where we do have these times of crisis that we're currently in, operational one-off quick picking up the phone is exhausting for everybody. So it's an immediate need for an immediate problem, but a longer term approach to how you deal with this over the next sort of 6 to 12 to 18 months is really important to allow that supply chain resilience to happen. Innovation doesn't get picked up unless it happens to be the standard course now. So how do we know about responsibly sourced materials? How do we know about a more efficient piece of kit that can run longer with less fuel? There's no ability to harness that at an operational level, or at least it's limited in terms of your ability to be able to harness that over time, and sometimes with additional cost. So sometimes the way to be able to limit that cost is to actually start to think about that strategic approach to help harness the innovation at an operational level. So they're the ways, again, to link it in. And continuous improvement and efficiencies. You know, again, if we're always thinking about, I just need to get it now for the cheapest price, or for the price and the budget that I have, we miss the opportunities for looking at how we can do things smarter, we can do things better, we can look at that efficiency lens. So from an operational level, there is a need, but to be able to harness some of those to address some of those limitations and start to think about how we can really start to add the value. A lot of what we teach in the school, a lot of the stuff that we do around the workshops and the training, really does look at it through a strategic lens. So when we're teaching sustainable procurement, when we're teaching about procurement best practice, it's really starting to push organizations into thinking about how do we harness and maximize the value and benefits we can get from the strategic purchasing. And that's really what we're going to cover in this next section. In terms of the wheel that I showed you early on, which is that sort of upstream and downstream, in the strategic element of procurement, what we're talking about is section 1 to section 5 in here. So we're talking about organizations understanding their procurement strategy at the very, very outset. And this procurement strategy could be at organizational level, or it could be at project level, if you've got big projects that you're working on. And if you're a medium-sized organization, you can still set up your own organizational level. But procurement strategy is very much about, what am I going to do? How do I leverage the market? How do I set my procurement activity up to be able to deliver value? And where are my key areas of spend that are going to be able to provide that for me? When we start to get further into understanding the value, we do then encourage organizations to think about driving into what we call category management. I've heard it called cluster management. I don't really worry too much about what the label is. But fundamentally, the things you buy have inherent risks and sustainability opportunities and impacts that you need to be able to manage. So at category level, you need to understand what you're purchasing so that you can really start to understand the possibility for value, the possibility for innovation, the possibility for developing the marketplace. So category management takes it from that procurement strategy level to say, at category level, what are the key things that I need to understand? And when we talked about the skill set of strategic purchasing individual, there's an even bigger, another layer, if you like, to somebody who does sort of category management, because they really do have a good understanding. Somebody who does a good category strategy understands the marketplace, understands the supply base, and is understanding how to be able to work with the supply chain going forward. Then thinking about strategic sourcing, so understanding, you know, what's the best option for us in terms of how we go to market? Is it about creating these category strategies? Is it about creating catalogs of materials to enable operations to run more effectively? Is it more about understanding how we could go into JVs or encourage partnerships and collaboration, but really going out to the marketplace and understanding what those needs are? Again, softer side still encourages the price, still encourages the cost consideration. That still is underpinned in everything that you're doing. But in most of these cases where you adopt a more strategic approach to procurement, is that value equation that you're looking for as well. How do I add on to that the fact that I need more apprentices, or I need to reduce my carbon, or I need to make sure that the number of materials I'm getting are effective. So that approach is really important. The contract management is quite interesting. We're a very strange industry in terms of the way that we do our contract management, in terms that you might find that procurement doesn't do that, that does then sit with people like your project managers or your individuals who are on site. Wherever that responsibility lies, however, it's a fundamentally important part of any strategic procurement that you're putting in place. The reality is that in most cases, whatever agreement that you put in place won't just be about getting certain products at certain prices at certain times. There will be other aspects that you need to consider on top of that, whether it is looking at improving the skills, or whether it is looking at understanding the risk of exploitation, whether it is reducing carbon associated with it. There will be that added value equation that you need to consider. So the contract management element is so fundamentally important, in addition to the fact that obviously managing contracts enables you to identify opportunities and efficiencies as you go forward. So resisting the let forget is really important. And then the supplier management. At a strategic level, in most cases, you will probably be finding that you are setting up preferred suppliers lists, strategic supplier lists, people that you just want to get to know better. A lot of the challenges that we have within construction are focused on the fact that we don't create those relationships with suppliers, that we don't really get to understand the culture and the behaviours. And then when we get down to delivery, in terms of products and services that they provide, we're not aligned. We have problems. There are issues in terms of the way that we deal with this. So supplier management is as important as contract management, in terms of really getting under the skin of the suppliers that you are working with. This is slightly different when it comes to public sector and private sector. Within public sector, supply management is a little bit more difficult to do, and there's a nervousness sometimes in public sector procurement, but it's still able to be done, just obviously not through the procurement process as such. It's that softer side of things that needs to happen at the tail end to really get to understand what a supplier does and why they do it well. If you set most of that strategic stuff up properly, you can actually then allow the operational procurement, the purchase to pay, the sort of pulling off on frameworks to run more efficiently and effectively. And that still runs on a regular basis on the projects. But the softer side, the strategic side, starts to really start to think about that leverage as you're going forward. So if we pick the three key things that we need to think about here, one of the really important bits that we have to think of when it comes to procurement. Procurement is not just about delivering goods to the right place at the right time, but it's also about ensuring the supply chain is delivering on your organisational commitments as well. So at an organisational level, you are going to have a huge amount of commitment that you're working on. I should imagine some of you are thinking about net zero at the moment in terms of carbon. Some of you are thinking about how you work on creating new products or new services, and most of that's going to come from your supply chain. So your supply chain is enabling you to deliver your organisational strategy. On the top of that, then, you then can articulate in your procurement strategy what procurement is going to do to enable that organisational strategy to be realised. We call that the golden thread. Whether it's a sustainability outcome, whether it happens to be an efficiency outcome, whether it happens to be an innovation outcome, whatever it is, your procurement strategy is a way to connect up to what the organisation is trying to do. The category strategy, as I said, is then what you do at an individual category level. And for those of you who are familiar with the work that we do on sustainable procurement, it is about that risk-based approach, about understanding what the category does in impacting that procurement strategy and organisation strategy. So if you're at net zero and you currently have a concrete contract that you're going to be doing, or a category manager who's looking at concrete, then net zero is going to be pretty intrinsically important to that concrete discussion, whether it's with the suppliers through the supplier management phase, or whether it's going to be through some of the specification work that you're going to do. If you are going to have a new recruitment contract put in place, and you've got a huge amount of commitments in your organisation and procurement around skills and apprentices and exploitation, possibly some of the social value inclusions as well, then again, that category is going to have a huge amount of information included in it that focuses specifically on what that organisation can do for you in those areas. So the category bit really starts to bring it down to a meaningful approach. So in the procurement strategy, when you're doing that, the key is to understand your spend, understand what your needs are, what the market can do, And when you're assessing the market, a piece of advice would be to assess how you are perceived in the market as much as how the market is set up to deal with your needs. One of the big things I see a lot in procurement is an assumption that everyone wants to work with you. And sometimes, you know, as organisations, we can be a bit frustrating to operate with. So understanding how we're perceived in the marketplace is really, really important, as well as what the market has the capability to do. So I see a lot where organisations I speak to talk about, I don't know if I can get FSC timber without it costing me £3,000 more per square metre. They haven't looked at the market. They don't understand how well established something like FSC is or BS 6001 is, but there shouldn't be the increase in price associated with it. Making sure that you are clear in your procurement strategy what you are trying to achieve, both from your perspective but your supply chain as well. And within that strategy, pick the areas that are really key. So within your organisational strategy, you may have key areas where you're huge amount of spend on concrete, huge amount of spend on labour, huge amount of spend on plant. They are your procurement initiatives. They're the focus that your organisation really needs to look at. That's the strategic lens you want to put in place. Everything else, put through your operational lens. The procurement strategy is helping you divide what needs that strategic approach because there's more added value, and what can you just leave to operational procurement. I don't mean that to sound really dismissive when I say it that way, but what I mean is that you can just let that happen on a project by project basis. Invest in your tools. There are so many procurement tools out there now. Admittedly, some of them can be a bit confusing, but there is things like e-tendering. You know, there's material planning tools. You know, even if you want to start to get into some of that blockchain technology, although that's probably a jump too far for us right now in terms of what we're looking for. But think about how we can make procurement more digital. It's a massive area for us at the moment. We're still very, very, very focused on paper and requisitions and processing. But whatever tools you invest in them properly in terms of in understanding what they do and what you need supply chains to do. I've seen this happen before where, if we've got suppliers on the call, where, you know, an organisation invests in new ways of processing invoices, which basically is a match for match. Great, but they haven't told a supplier how to set up the invoice so that it does match, so that it can get paid, so that it can go through automatically. So whatever tools you do invest in, whatever digitisation you invest in, great, but don't underestimate the need for training either your own organisation and your supply chain to be able to harness their efficiencies. Create what that strategy looks like, and in your procurement strategy, you may be thinking about things like, how much staff do I need? Have I got the right skills to be able to look at my area of strategic procurement? Have I got the right people in operations? So this sits very much at that management level. How do I set up my procurement functions to enable me to do that? And don't underestimate the need to have the conversation maybe with some of those people who are providing procurement functions but aren't a procurement person in their department, if you see what I mean. So where you have got project managers who are doing contract management, where you have got engineers who are specifiers, think about how they fit into that procurement strategy as well. It's really important. And then with anything that you do, execute and follow up. It's a continuous improvement loop. So understand how your procurement is going to function, execute that strategy, and keep reporting on it. One of the challenges we have in procurement is that we do not, and I say this as a person who gets very frustrated with this anyway, is that we do not talk about the value and the best way of doing procurement as much as possible. We do tend to be very quiet and in the shadows as a function, or be seen as very moany because we get told that we shouldn't be doing what we should be doing when we tell engineers not to do what they should be doing. So think about executing and following that up as much as you possibly can. If you're then going into category strategies, you know, what you are then looking for is bringing it further down. So that procurement strategy sets what you are looking to do either at organisational or operational level. Then into individual categories, they will have their own strategies, and that they will sit with the individuals who are going to develop them and deliver them. And they, as I've said, rely very heavily on things like supplier relationship management, making sure that you're evaluating suppliers, making sure that you're looking at all that soft skill work that needs to go into category management. It isn't just about negotiating a price, it's about understanding how we get that price that we need as well as all the value that we are going through there. And it is a skill. It is a really, really good skill. We do have a lack of really good categories, but we have some brilliant ones. We need more really good category and strategic managers in this space. There is an identification of stakeholders working not just in that procurement function, but working outside in that specification world, in the contract management world, understanding what's going on in the market. They are really important aspects of any category strategy. And obviously in there, you start to embed things like sustainable outcomes that you're looking for in that added value equation, or looking at ethical procurement, if that happens to be in there as well. But fundamentally, these are about ensuring that you've identified what it is you want this category to do, what performance is looking for, and obviously what pricing and costing is associated with that. That's at a very simplified level. And there's a link there to a really good document if you're familiar with it on how to do good category management. In terms of how it works, the benefits, well, the reality is if you take everything that operational procurement struggles with, well, strategic helps you. So it helps with that cost optimization. It helps you understand where that value sits and how we can actually create additional value to what we're looking to procure. It helps you deal with the CSR and sustainability issues. It helps you understand the innovation through knowing what the market has the capability to do. And with that forward thinking, that forward planning, that horizon scanning that you're looking for, you've got much more of an ability to understand that supply chain resilience, to understand the sort of issues that are going to come to your supply chain and ways that you can either mitigate them or manage that small pain, but then obviously look for a longer term mitigation strategy going forward. So it really does complement the way that operational procurement works by dealing with those weaknesses in the operational system. So finally, the things to consider, if you're in your organisation and you've set up procurement, there are certain things that you can think about. If you're a small organisation who's on this call, because I haven't even got a procurement person, I very strongly advise investing in one. Invest in your procurement teams, invest in either the numbers, although if you ever speak to procurement professionals, I'll always tell you there's not enough of us, or making sure that you're building up their skills and their competencies. If you do decide that you need to embed a bit more of a strategic approach to the way that you procure, then understand the transition needed from the sort of harder technical skills associated with purchasing to that softer skill side that you would need to in the strategic approach. Think about technology. We have got through the school a digitisation and procurement e-learning module, and I think there's also a workshop that we're running through that programme, which again can help you understand the sorts of tools that you can put in place within procurement to really improve that data flow. Data is key, and in procurement it's so key, even down to understanding what you're buying and from who. I still see so many organisations who don't know that. So making sure that you use technology to get data to allow you to make the right decisions is really important. Think about formalising. Don't go to the extent of formalising everything, but if you're a really, really small company, I'm not talking about creating War and Peace. If you're a very large company, though, it should be really clear who is responsible for what within procurement, but also thinking about things like segregation of duties, making sure there's no opportunity for fraud through the way your procurement processes work. So it's really clear roles and responsibilities within the organisation. What are the processes you should be following? Again, we see quite a lot of a weakness in governance within organisations around procurement. And again, pages can be huge or can be split. It's about proportional to businesses. Educate your organisation. Procurement does a lot of things. It isn't just about cheapest price. Procurement is about that resilience, around the innovation, around driving sustainable outcomes. Your supply chain could be up to 80% of what your business is producing. So 80% of the project. That's a significant amount of responsibility on the procurement function. And I say procurement as a wider thing. So make sure everybody understands the importance of procurement, but then there is a possible need to think about strategic and operational procurement to maximise the value and maximise some of those costs. And understand the supply chain. Understand where you sit, understand what the supply chain is doing for you. Again, we run through the school a number of sessions. I run a workshop on transparency in supply chain. it is becoming a bigger issue. So understand what the supply chain is doing, understand that strategic procurement can help you get deeper into that supply chain through longer conversations, longer relationships, better targeted approaches in categories where it's necessary. So it was a small dive, so I thank you for all listening. The reality is that organisations need to do both. You need your operational procurement to obviously keep projects flowing. If you're a smaller organisation, you'll be more prone to an operational approach to procurement. There is nothing wrong with that. But if you start to see a need to look at added value, a need to understand how to drive innovation, you need to improve the efficiencies on a lot of your projects, you need to get closer to suppliers, then a strategic approach to procurement needs to complement that. And there is a real difference between the way both of those operate and the sort of skill set and people you need to be able to address those. So if you're a procurement manager thinking about how you run your procurement, hopefully I've told you some stuff that will help, or you already know this. But the reality is that you can see that two-vein approach. If you're a smaller organisation thinking about whether you should invest in procurement, this gives you an idea of maybe where you need to focus your resources, the things you need to think about. With our webinars and our lunch and learns, we are only running, these ones are little 1 hour deep dives into, or little dives, shall I say, into aspects, but we do and are running up until Christmas and post-Christmas, but the events up to Christmas. Really take some of these principles and dive into them further, and in a workshop environment, you get a chance to obviously talk to the trainers as well around experience and things that they've done. So we're running an introduction to procurement workshop. We've got due diligence workshop, a webinar, sorry, in November as well. We're doing a materials procurement workshop on what you need to be thinking around procurements, and collaborative procurement, which is obviously the new focus at the moment for our industry. That's just before Christmas. So I don't know if I'm training on that one. If it is, I'll try and wear a Christmas hat. But that would be your last taste into procurement before we finish with the Christmas break. So have a look on our events page, and also have a think if there's anything else you'd like to do. Sometimes there's workshops and want other support. We're always open to understanding if there's anything else that you need. So as I said, we will send over the slides. We'll make sure you get the video link to this. Jenny, have you put the feedback in the chat? So if you haven't, apologies, I think I'll have forgotten to do that. I will send the feedback link around, and I do strongly ask if you could make sure that you put the feedback in, because we're always trying to improve in this space. But in the meantime, I have got some questions that I will go through before we let you go. So, oh, brilliant. Jenny's put them in the chat box, so if you can use that to do the feedback form. And I have a June. I think I can allow you to talk. I've never done this before, so you have to bear with me. June, do you want to ask your question? Or do you want to pop it in the chat? Ah, there you are, June. Are you there, June? Put it in the chat for me. I can see the hand up. Oh, hand's gone down. Okay, any more questions? This is live, guys. This is what happens. Any questions? But if you've got them, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A panel. We'll give you a couple more minutes or another minute to do the feedback form. Otherwise, we will say thank you and let you go about your merry day. No problem, June. That's fine. Don't worry. June's basically put the sounds a bit poor, but thank you. That's not a problem. Not a problem at all, June. Any other questions? No? I've sent you all to sleep. In which case, I thank you for joining. As I said, everything will go around. Anything you want to just pop in the chat just before we just say, please do. Make sure you do the feedback form, but we will send that link alongside the slides. Merry day. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you very much.